it was Vigano who came forward before this, just recently, with the accusation that Francis engaged in sexual relations with novices, when he was in Argentina. So the timing that a lot of people are failing to address, and they're being distracted by this whole sedevacantism,
Yeah.
They're failing to look at things logically. They're failing to recognize what Vigano said in 2018 and what he said 2 weeks before that.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below. Praise be to Jesus. Father Gene Gomulka is back on the team with us. You might recall that Father Gene is a canceled priest, number one, but number two, he's a victim abuse advocate and investigator. Father Gene, welcome to the team. Thanks for being on with us.
Thank you. It's good to be back, Joe. Thank you.
I want to get started with the Vigano story. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has been called to the Vatican to stand trial, which he's not going to do. He has decided to just make a statement, and he doesn't plan to show up, and he's already anticipating being excommunicated. But one of the issues with that story, I'm not a sedevacantist, just to be clear. I don't share Vigano's opinion of the Pope in that regard. But the timing of all of this is suspect. I mean, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has been saying things that are considering rocking the boat quite a bit since, I don't know, 2018 at least. So why now? What do you say, Father Gene?
Well, you have to understand two things. When we look at what happened in August of 2018, if you remember when Vigano accused Pope Francis of covering up for McCarrick and not acting on the warning that he gave him in 2013 about McCarrick. In his 2018 testimony, he called him and asked him to resign, not because of anything having to do with the validity of the election. It had everything to do with him covering up abuse. And so when people today start talking about sedevacantism and so forth, that, remember, was not really the initial issue. The issue was, did he or did he not, did Francis or did he not cover up for McCarrick? And remember, qui tacet consentire. The Pope response was silence. And in his silence rendered consent, to, in my opinion, to the accusation against him. Because if you accuse me of something and I'm innocent, I'm not going to remain silent. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to want to countersue. I'm going to want to have an investigation. I want to prove my innocence. But if I'm guilty, I'm going to be quiet. I don't want to hear. I want it to go away. I'm going to do everything I can to cover it up. So first of all, remember again, Vigano's charge was about Francis covering up abuse. Now, with regard to the timing that you asked about, what happened just 2 weeks before this issue came up about him being called to the Vatican? Well, it was Vigano's accusation that Francis not only covered up abuse, as was very clearly documented by Martin Boudreau in his exceptional documentary, Sex Abuse in the Church, The Code of Silence. But also, it was Vigano who came forward before this, just recently, with the accusation that Francis engaged in sexual relations with novices, when he was in Argentina. So the timing that a lot of people are failing to address, and they're being distracted by this whole sedevacantism,
Yeah.
They're failing to look at things logically. They're failing to recognize what Vigano said in 2018 and what he said 2 weeks before that. nobody is unfortunately talking about those accusations, which, in my opinion, are very, very based in fact. And that is why, on the other hand, I have spoken with people about the sedevacantism, and I said too that even though that was not the main point that Vigano was always talking about, there is, however, if you look at Francis, you see that Francis, for years, was associated with McCarrick, going back to being part of the San Gallen Mafia. Now, if on one hand we have McCarrick, who is credibly accused of abuse, and McCarrick, who's also a part of the San Gallen Mafia, along with Vigano, then there is, some people can make an argument that there is also a relationship between sedevacantism and abuse. Just as, you would say that, for example, the LGBT community would say abortion rights and LGBTQ rights are inseparable. That's why you have so many, gay bishops and so forth who are very, very soft when it comes to speaking out in defense of human life.
Well, I find it also very fascinating that it's not just about the timing of things. It's also, sort of a playbook that we've seen before. McCarrick gets credibly accused. He's been doing this for years, and apparently, like even Bishop Loeb said, we all knew it. We all know. We all knew this was going on. But finally, he gets credibly accused. Finally, they take action. And you thought finally we're going to get answers, but instead he got laicized really fast so that he wouldn't be put on trial, so that we couldn't find those facts. And now McCarrick will live the rest of his days comfortably under the care of someone. All of his, civil charges have been dropped. So I think there's somewhat of a parallel here. These charges, they come up, these accusations come up about this sort of McCarrick-like behavior with Pope Francis when he was still in Argentina, and now we're talking about sedevacantism, to your point. So I see a parallel there from the same playbook. Do you?
Yes. Well, remember, if you look at a number of people who have been canceled, Strickland, okay? What happened before he was canceled? Again, it goes back to October or November of 2018, right? Mm-hmm. When he stood up in front of the bishops at the U.S. CCB meeting and addressed the problem of sexual predation and clerical homosexual misconduct. And that really was the beginning of the end for Strickland. And if you look at all of the other victims, all the other priests who were canceled, even seminarians, if you take, for example, Anthony Gorgia, who was canceled at the North American College because he was concerned about the sexual predation that was going on the part of Father Adam Park. He is canceled, but what reason is given? It's not the real reason that he addressed the sexual predation and the homosexual misconduct on the part of Park, but also the homosexual involvement of the rector, Father Peter Harmon, with his previous bishop, Joseph Lucas. That was not the reason they gave for canceling Anthony Gorgia. They said he was slow in human formation, or he didn't fill out his travel claim properly to go back and have his operation. The same thing is happening with all the canceled priests. You look at Strickland and now, Vigano, even in my own case, or even in the case of Father Tom Doyle, Archbishop O'Brien accused Father Tom Doyle of writing some memo on canon law that he disagreed with as the basis for him, being thrown out. So they always come up with some really ridiculous reason. And again, if people can't see what's really going on, then I think they're kind of slow.
Let me ask you a question. Out of all the victims over the past many decades, maybe you don't have the number right off the top of your head, but maybe you can just sort of spitball it for me. How many of the victims that are, at the hands of clergy have been minors, like little kids? How many have been female? How many have been male? And how many have been post-pubescent males?
Okay, that's a very, very important question. And the reason it is because there's been a lot of misinformation about the problem. Remember, for years, they always talked about the Catholic Church and having a problem with pedophilia.
Mm-hmm.
Numerous articles appeared, priest pedophilia. But that was not true. The Catholic Church does not have a problem with pedophilia. Less than 10% of the victims of clerical abuse, are pre-pubescent children.
Mm.
The real problem, the largest number, over 80% of the victims are young males, and for the most part, they're teenage boys.
Wow.
So you see, remember, for example, I told you I studied with Cardinal Blaise Supich in Rome. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And if you listened to Blaise Supich, his argument has always been, well, look, psychologists show that there is no relationship between homosexuality and pedophilia. Well, that's true. There is, you cannot say that homosexuals, more so than heterosexuals, are going to take advantage of pre-pubescent children. That's true. But what Supich and the Pope and others are not saying is that, hello, we don't have a pedophilia problem. Our problem is ephebophilia. Our problem is that we have homosexual priests who are coming on to, teenage boys, post-pubescent males.
Yeah.
And there is now. Remember, in my recent article in Complicit Clergy, there was an important statistic that a lot of people perhaps fail to note, and that is that 73% of homosexuals acknowledge having preyed on adolescents or younger boys. 73%.
Wow.
Now, what that means is this, Joe. That means that, if you're a homosexual, you may be sleeping with other guys your own age and so forth, like a lot of priests and bishops are doing today, right? But it doesn't mean that you're not going to be tempted with young meat.
Oof.
Because how many times have you met, like, for example, a young woman, you find her very attractive. You say, wow, this is gorgeous. And then all of a sudden you find out, well, she's 16 years old. You say, oh my goodness. She looked like she was 23, But in the meantime, you found yourself attracted to this beautiful woman, and she is beautiful, but you didn't realize how young she was. So you see that you can be, the reason 73% of homosexuals acknowledge having come on to these young men is because, that is, they find them attractive, And so that is why you should not be surprised when you see statistics like 100,000 lawsuits involving the Boy Scouts of America.
Mm.
Remember Judith Reisman, God rest her soul, the Jewish investigative journalist and researcher whom I met in Arlington, Virginia, when I lived and worked in the Pentagon.
Mm.
Judith Reisman warned the Boy Scouts of America. She says, look, if you accept homosexuals to serve as scoutmasters, you're putting the Scouts at risk. And again, she knew, the statistic about, how they would be tempted, and she was familiar with all those studies. And did they listen to her? No, they did not. Well, and neither has the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
You see, the Catholic Church, by ordaining all of these homosexuals, they put all of these young people at stake. And remember, all of this was documented in November of 2018, the same meeting where Vigano stood up in front of all the bishops, or not Vigano, but Strickland stood up and said, Houston, we have a problem. Remember,
right,
it was that same meeting that Dr. Paul Sullins, the researcher at Catholic University of America, his report was circulated to all the bishops. And remember, his report showed that there was a direct correlation between the number of homosexuals in the Catholic priesthood in the United States and the number of abuse victims. And again, who were not pedophile, not prepubescent children, who were teenage boys. So what happened to Father Sullins' report? The same thing that happened with Father Tom Doyle's report in 1985, when he warned the American bishops and the Vatican, including Cardinal Ratzinger and Pope John Paul II, that if the recommendations of his report about addressing the serious problem of sexual predation is not addressed and acted on, the Catholic Church in the United States could face up to $1 billion in lawsuits within 10 years. Well, of course, Father Doyle was wrong. We're looking probably today closer to maybe, $8 billion, because even Los Angeles is going to be looking at close to $3 billion as a result of the lifting of the statute of limitations now, after they had already paid out $660 million, back in 2008.
That's an unfathomable number, Father. I don't know how much money can one collect to pay out, which is, I guess, part of the big motivation during the pandemic is close the doors. We don't have that kind of money. We're only paying out abuse victim money. We don't have payout COVID money. So close all the doors, and there you go. Cut off the sacraments from the faithful. It just seems like the scandals are compounding and making it worse and worse. Which reminds me, then, what do you make of Pope Francis's comments to the Italian Bishop Conference that there's too much fracciagini going on in the Italian seminary? What do you make of that?
As soon as I heard that, I thought of two people. I thought of McCarrick, who in 2002 in Dallas said the same thing. And then I thought also then of then Archbishop Edwin O'Brien in 2005, when he was interviewed by a reporter of the National Catholic Register about his upcoming study on seminaries in the United States, where he said that, homosexuals, they should not be ordained. But what happened afterwards, again, was a homosexual who had been invited at the Courage Conference by O'Brien to enter the seminary and be not only ordained a priest, but also serve one day as a chaplain in the military. Hold it. How do you reconcile one hand, O'Brien saying no homosexuals, next thing you know, he's out there recruiting them. So it's a smokescreen. What the Pope was saying, how many homosexual priests have said, oh, well, I used to have this girlfriend, I was dating when I was younger and so forth. It's all a smokescreen. In other words, those of us who studied with these characters, who know them, far better than most laity, because we lived with them, we studied with them, we know them, and we know who they associate with. Because somebody says, well, did you really see him having sex with another man? Oh, no, but consider who he associates with. In other words, if I invite you again to go with me to a gay bar, are you not going to, presume that I'm gay? Why would I be going to a gay bar if I'm not gay? Why would I associate? Why would I put in charge of my Casa Santa Marta in the Vatican none other than Monsignor Batista Rica, who had a gay, Swiss boyfriend in Paraguay, who was caught having sex with a prostitute in an elevator, and then who
Wow.
was also beaten up in a gay park, as documented in an article in 1 Peter 5. Why would I put this person in charge of my residence,
Yeah.
knowing that he was a very, very active homosexual?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer these questions. It just seems bizarre to me and to the average layperson, way above our pay grade to even wrap our heads around, let alone figure out what to do about that. How many cases are you involved in when it comes to sexual abuse cases? Like, give us a sense of the scope. I know the wolves seem to be running the hen house right now, but at the same time, I'm the kind of guy who says, well, they can't own this. They don't. The church doesn't belong to them, and we need to remind them that they don't own this church, even though I think they've convinced a lot of Catholics that they do. What say you, Father Gene?
Well, the number, what a lot of people don't realize is that the number is not, unfortunately, going down.
Oof.
For example, Joe, you saw the headlines recently of the priest in Nashville, Tennessee, who he was ordained what year? Wasn't ordained 30, 40, 50 years ago. He's not an older priest.
Mm.
He was ordained in 2020,
Wow.
and he has multiple, sex abuse charges pending against him, and so. You also have all of these former seminarians whom I mentioned in my latest video entitled "Who Will Save Our Seminarians?" In that document, you saw pictures of Father Michael Callahan from his Grindr account.
Yeah.
And you read how he was propositioning people, inviting people to have sex with him.
Mm.
You can't deny that evidence. We have emails from Father Dosiak, who was the Ukrainian priest who still kept in ministry in Rhode Island, who propositioned the former seminarian Joshua Metcalf, who then almost committed suicide, not
Mm.
because of the propositioning that he experienced, but more so because Bishop Paul, the eparch of Stamford, covered up the abuse. So, and these are not old cases. That's why you have a court case going on. You have a suit against the eparchy of Stamford right now, today. You have a lawsuit, against the Diocese of Brooklyn and the Brooklyn Oratory on the part of Timothy Passo. You have the $125 million lawsuit against Cardinal Dolan, the New York Archdiocese, and the North American College, brought forward by Anthony Gorgia, which
Wow.
again, Joe, if that case is not won, again, unless people support, that lawsuit, I have no hope for any for the future of the priesthood in the United States. The reason is that you're not going to get any more straight young men to enter the priesthood, knowing that they don't have a prayer. And the problem is the bishops and the vocation directors don't want to admit, the high percentage of gays in the episcopacy, the priesthood, and the seminaries today.
Is there a link? Is there a coordination of sorts between the Lavender Mafia that we've been sort of focused on and the perverts that are heterosexual perverts within the clergy? Do they just sort of cooperate because they're really just giving into their disordered passions, and so they have a like-minded interest there, or not, or am I just reading too much into that?
Well, it's important to note, that there are both heterosexuals and homosexuals who are not uh, uh, living out according to their vows. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people believe, a lot of Catholics believe that the bishops in the church have been covering up abuse all these years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let me say this: the bigger cover up is not the abuse. The bigger cover up involved here is that they do not want to cover up the source of the abuse. In other words, they do not want to say that Father Sullins was right when he showed how the increase in the number of homosexuals has led to the abuse. In other words, they don't want to address the cause. So if I'm sick and you treat my symptoms, I'm not going to get better. On the other hand, if you diagnose me with cancer and you treat me with radiation or chemotherapy, well, then I have a chance of surviving. So the problem is, as long as the church continues to recruit, ordain, and promote homosexuals to be bishops, archbishops, cardinals, and even the Pope, don't be surprised if the Pope wants to support the blessing of homosexual unions, or is trying to get people to think that, well, this is it's not as bad as people used to say it was. So that's the problem. The church does not want to admit that we have that problem. Plus, the church does not want to admit also, when you talk about heterosexual relationships, the church does not want to admit that at any given moment in time, no more than 50% of all priests are practicing celibacy. Now, I said at any given time. That is not from me. That's really from the late Richard Sipe.
Oh.
And he's often misquoted because a lot of people will say, well, according to Sipe, only half the priests are living celibate lives. No. According to Sipe, he found that in the course of your lifetime, let's pretend you're a priest, Joe, okay?
Mm.
Let's say you're 80 years old now, right?
Mm.
Now, according to Sipe, you only have a 2% chance that from the day that you were ordained to right now that you were constantly, leading a celibate life. 2%, wow. Not 50%. So when he says that at any given moment in time, what he's saying is right now, if you're straight, you may be having a girlfriend or whatever. And if you're gay, you're having a boyfriend. But of course, remember, the heterosexual violations are much greater in places like Africa and Asia, where the majority of the clergy are heterosexuals. Whereas in the United States, where the majority of the bishops and the priests are gay, you're going to have a much larger percentage who are sleeping around with other seminarians, priests, or men at truck stops, just like, the Grinder incident with Monsignor Jeffrey Bureau, so all these accusations, this gay sex that's going on, people do not want to admit. Now, what I think is sad, having taught in the seminary before I entered the military, I think it's very sad that we're not honest with seminarians and their parents.
Yeah.
Because you see, if I told you, Joe, that if you become a priest, you only have like a 2% chance that throughout your entire priesthood, you're not going to violate your vow of celibacy. Or if I tell you at any given moment in time, you have a 50% chance that you're going to be living a celibate life. And so I'm not saying that they're sleeping around all the time, but it goes back to the movie, Keeping the Faith. Are you familiar with that movie, Joe?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. So as you know, in that movie with Ben Stiller and Ed Norton, when Ed Norton, the young priest, is falling in love with this beautiful woman, he asked the pastor, "Have you ever been in love?" And what did the pastor say? Well, about once every decade. In other words, he was saying about, in the course of his life, there are different times he's met someone, he fell in love, and then he had to decide, am I going to remain a priest or am I going to leave and get married?
Mm.
So, Joe, that happens in the life of every priest.
Yeah.
Now, with the heterosexual, that means falling in love with a woman, and there's an emotional connection there and so forth. So that's not going to be as often as it's going to be for a homosexual, where the partnering rates are much, much higher.
Okay.
So the number of sex partners a straight person has in a lifetime versus a homosexual is drastically different.
So, okay, so I guess I have a couple follow-up questions there. One is, what in the world, Africa has heterosexual problems and America has homosexual problems. Why was the American church so infected with homosexuality as opposed to the African church? So what causes that? Or what was the root to that? And then I guess the next one that came to my mind is, I hear a lot about reform in seminaries. There's a seminary near me. It used to have a very bad reputation for homosexual men. Now you don't really hear about it so often. I'm not sure it's completely cured of all those issues. I don't actually know, but I do know that a lot of seminaries claim that they've sort of squared that away, figured all that out. So where are we at with the seminaries? So number one is, why does the American church, so infected with homosexual clergy as opposed to the African church? And then what is the status of seminaries, Father?
Okay. Let me take the second question first with regard to the percentage in the United States of where things stand now, right now. There's a diocese, and I'm not going to name it because I don't want to give away the names of the individuals or the bishop.
Sure.
But there's a diocese where they had 2 seminarians only. And the bishop, who was on the board of trustees of a particular seminary, wanted his seminarians to go to that particular seminary. Well, they didn't want to go to that seminary because they felt that seminary had a reputation for, they called it the Pink Palace, okay?
Yeah.
So they wanted to go, but no, he insisted that they go to this other seminary, or to this seminary where he was, on the board. Well, of course, both of them left after a while. So you see that now when you ask them, well, why did they leave? A lot of times people don't want to discuss, the homosexual cultures and so forth that's going on in the seminaries. But the fact is that you don't get an honest take. For example, the Catholic News Agency, when they reported that Monsignor Thomas Powers, who was chosen to be the new rector of the North American College in Rome, when he was sent there, CNA reported that there were around 200 seminarians enrolled there. Well, I have sources who, looked into that and reported to me, and later on it was confirmed with visual and photographic proof that no, there weren't 200 seminarians at the North American College now. There are less than 90.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, then when I had a lawyer from Connecticut who wrote to CNA and asking them to issue a retraction. We showed them the evidence. Show us that there are 200. We have the evidence. There's 2. What did CNA do? No, they did not issue a retraction. They ignored us. So you see, Joe, there's a lot. The church leaders do not want to admit to not only the percentage of gays in the priesthood, they also don't want to talk about the numbers of young men in the priesthood. And when I issued a report on the status of seminaries, and I sent it to every rector, and I documented all of this. And I said, well, look, here's my data, which shows that you still have a very serious problem. People didn't get back to me. They didn't refute it. In other words, if I were a rector and I felt I had all these straight guys in my seminary, I would immediately call me up or write back and say, hey, look, maybe that was true 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, but no more. Most of my young men here, and we take a very strong stand.
Yeah.
If someone gets caught, engaging in homosexual relations, we throw them out immediately. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior. But no one got back to me. the same kind of response that the Pope gave to Vigano when he said, well, you're covering up for McCarrick. Silence. So I interpret their silence. When I say my data shows this, when I say that people are telling me they're leaving the seminaries, when I see people like Timothy Passo, Anthony Gorgia, Joshua Metcalf, all these young men leaving, Matthew Bojanovsky, Stephen Parisi. I can give you the names of all these seminarians recently, not 50 years ago, recently, who are leaving, who've left the seminaries because of the homosexual culture. I can only conclude that we still have a problem.
Yeah, now, I definitely think we have a problem.
Now, there was another, you had a first question.
Why is the American church so infected with homosexuals versus the African church? Its issue is heterosexual in nature in their abuse cases. So why homosexual in America?
Well, if you go to Africa, you're not going to find a lot of LGBTQ demonstrations.
Praise be to God.
You're going to find in that culture, as well as in Arabic cultures, people who engage in that behavior, which again they consider as Scripture would uphold is against both the natural and divine laws. They're not going to tolerate that. Whereas in the United States, with the whole LGBTQ movement, which of course is supported, actually, a lot of its foundation had its inception really in the minor seminaries. Because remember, the minor seminaries took these young boys before they discovered girls and introduced them there to gay sex. And what did they do? But remember, they were groomed, so they didn't realize what was being done to them was abuse. They perceived it again as love and friendship.
Yeah.
So then they went on, and then they, of course, did it with others in their parishes. And I just lost a classmate who was ordained right next to me. This past week, he was buried.
I'm so sorry.
And the bishop imposed hands on me and then on him. Well, again, the difference was if he was later on removed because he was accused of abusing teenage boys, the difference again was that he went to a minor high school seminary where I believe he was groomed and abused. And so when you have all these priests and now bishops who were victims of that, they want to promote the homosexual agenda. They can't do it publicly because then they want to lie. They want people to think, oh, I gave up having a wife and children to follow Jesus Christ. No, I mean, I can show you a number of young men, they meet a priest or a bishop, like O'Brien, that the young man at the Courage Conference. And then the bishop or the priest says, oh, you should come in and study for the priesthood. And then you get him to seminary. Why does the bishop or the young homosexual priest want to encourage this young man to become a priest? He wants a partner. And then you, Joe, and your family and good Catholics are going to support their lifestyle. So if they have an orgy on a Friday night,
God have mercy,
in the rectory, you're paying for it.
Yikes. What does it take to clean the house? What would it take to rid the church, rid the faithful, the body of Christ of this plague?
Well, you're going to need, because the Catholic Church is a hierarchical structure, it's not a democracy. Until you have a leader, someone in the papacy who's going to say, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. In other words, look at right now, there are over 150 bishops credibly accused of abuse. We have priests like, who are having nuns drink, their semen out of their chalices and doing all kinds of things, despicable, gross, things. And what is the Pope doing? Nothing. He's leaving them in ministry. And as long as you have a Pope who tolerates this kind of behavior, Joe, if you were the elected pope, or if I were elected pope, do you think you would keep those 150 bishops who are credibly accused?
No, no
You know,
way. No way.
would you give Donald Wuerl, what, between $4 and $8 million
Nope.
after covering up all that abuse in New York? I
No.
mean, in Pittsburgh.
Nope. I
No.
can't even imagine it. I mean, this is where the Marine Corps shines the best. Hey, you're fired. Get out. Like it's that.
Right, right.
It doesn't take much more than that. But instead, they don't fire them. They promote them. And now I suppose they're quietly retiring them or protecting them at the Vatican when there's credible charges against them back in the home country. They let them live out the rest of their life at the Vatican, like Cardinal Law did, for instance. So it's a troubling trend, and it's not. I guess some people might think, well, it's just Pope Francis. No, this goes back, doesn't it? This goes back a few pontificates at least.
Well, it does, and that's why I'm kind of sad, because remember I told you in one of our conversations that I befriended and got to know Pope John Paul II when he was a cardinal, when we met in Rome, and invited me to visit him, and we did met with him different times, celebrated Mass and socialized. It really kind of broke my heart, when I learned, the truth, about all the abuse that he allowed to be covered up. Mm-hmm. Now, the difference is, though, remember, neither Benedict nor John Paul II were ever accused of abusing someone, unlike Francis, who was accused by Vigano, mm-hmm. and also by sources that I know. Mm. So there's the difference, and so that also helps to explain why Francis cannot discipline these bishops, because just as all the bishops knew what McCarrick was up to, well, let me tell you, Joe, the Catholics have to understand, the bishops know the Pope is dirty. Mm. The bishops know what he was doing in Argentina. They know about all the abuse he covered up. He can't discipline them. He cannot correct them, because they know that he is just as bad, if not worse, than they are.
Okay, so is it a case that you've got bishops that are complicit in the same crimes as what we described, and then you've got bishops that are sort of what I call fence sitters? They might be decent men in and of themselves, but maybe they don't have the courage to do the right thing or stand up and say the right thing. Maybe they haven't found the gear that Bishop Strickland has found, I suppose. What would you say about that? Like, give me a sense of what's the proportion here? What's the percentage of bishops that could, if they could find some courage, speak up with some credibility?
I would estimate no more than 20%. No more than
20%. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Because you see, Joe, if you're a gay bishop, okay, and you've been covering up for your priest in the diocese, some of whom perhaps you groomed yourself when you were on the faculty of the seminary when you were a young priest, you want, someone like Francis in office, because he's always going to cover for you, because he himself has done the same things that you're accused of doing. And that other, let's say, no more than 20%, they have a nice life. They lead a very, very comfortable life. Yeah. And they saw what happened to Torres in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. They saw what happened to Strickland in the United States. They know that if they speak up, they're gone, and they don't want to live in the streets. And so, look what happened under Henry VIII. Yeah. You have Thomas More and John Fisher, right? Well, today, again, you have Vigano and you have Strickland. And what's happening to them is the same thing. And the bishops in England at the time, were they not complicit? Yeah. Did they not keep quiet? Did they defend people like Sir Thomas More or Bishop Fisher? No. They kept their mouths shut, just like the American bishops and other bishops in the world are doing today. And again, the problem is they know. You see, Joe, it would be different, if they didn't know what was going on, but they know. And that's why, when people like Farrell and Worrell and others, and they said, "Oh, well, we didn't know, what was going on with McCarrick."
Right.
And I mean, when I was a seminarian, I was told, "Look, whatever you do, don't get in the elevator with this guy alone." And they're going to say they don't know. So, Joe, they do not want to address the fact what they do know. They know about Francis the same way they knew about McCarrick. But they were afraid of McCarrick because he had the power. He had the connections. He had the money. He had the ear. He was going to be a cardinal. He had the ear of the Pope and the Pope's secretary, Jivich.
Yep. Rodney Stark, he's since passed, but he's like an agnostic at best kind of a guy. He wrote a lot of history books. I would say he was very sincere and truthful. So let the facts lead you where they should. He didn't make conclusions before researching the facts. So he's got books on how the church spread in the ancient Roman Empire. He's got books on the Crusades, etc. And in one of the Crusades, which I'm going through right now, he talks about the church of piety versus the ecclesiastical church at war with each other in history. And, and the ebbs and flows of who gets to win that battle and gets to make decisions, and then it goes the other way. So I bring that up to say, it feels, when I read that from Rodney Stark, who's not a Catholic, God rest his soul, I'm like, identify. I'm like, I feel like this is where we're at. The Church of Piety, or you might say Vigano, you might say Bishop Strickland, Bishop Athanasius Schneider could be another example. Some would say Cardinal Burke. Some might say, others. But anyway, my point is versus Pope Francis, Cardinal Fernandez, Viola. I mean, it goes on. It just goes on and on. So, are we looking at a pendulum swing here? And we just happen to be at a point where the church of the ecclesiastical power grab is in charge of things, but we'll eventually get back to the church of piety and see a correction. Do you think we'll see a correction?
Well, Joe, the problem is, the majority of the cardinals who are going to be voting for the next pope, were put in place by Pope Francis.
Yeah.
And when you have that kind of voting block in place, and they know, and because most of them, are part of the Lavender Mafia. I mean, they're part of the problem. They do not want someone, for example, a good, straight, holy cardinal from Africa being elected, because they're afraid that they're going to lose their job.
Yeah,
that he's not going to tolerate, that he knows, what they're up to and what they're doing, and he is not going to allow 150 bishops credibly accused of abuse to be collecting all this money and living, very comfortable lives. So I don't foresee the College of Cardinals electing a good, holy, cardinal to become the next pope. I hope I'm wrong. I pray to God.
Me too.
I pray to God that I'm wrong, but unless they feel, it would take almost a revelation for someone now to convince everyone that what Francis has been up to, not only in terms of covering up abuse, but also if they could show that the allegations that he engaged in sex with seminarians in Argentina is true, then I think the cardinals who are guilty of similar acts of covering up abuse or engaging in homosexual acts with other priests or seminarians are going to be less inclined to want to be elected, because they're afraid that they're going to be outed too, just like Francis. But on the other hand, if Francis pulls this off and gets away with it, which is possible too, because remember, Francis has the support of the media. If you look at the report that Martin Boudreau produced, his documentary Sex Abuse in the Church, The Code of Silence, you'll see that most Americans, I would venture to say that no more than maybe 1% of Americans or less have viewed that documentary, which documents clearly how, Francis covered up abuse, even though he said it never happened in my diocese. So as long as the media continues to cover for him and other, cardinals who are engaged in this kind of behavior, it's going to be hard for the people then to believe that there's a problem.
Yeah, I can see it. Let's go to this fundraiser that you have for Anthony Gorgia, I think he was a former seminarian at the NAC when he encountered the abuse there. Give me the backstory. I know we've talked about it before, but remind me again, what's the backstory of his story and why he's currently embroiled in a lawsuit?
Well, again, Anthony Gorgia grew up in Staten Island. His mother had 2 miscarriages. And then the third attempt succeeded, but Anthony, she knew that she would not have another child. And so when Anthony was 6 years old, he said to his mother, Maria, and his father, Michele, that he wanted to be a priest. He felt God was calling him to become a priest. They could have said, well, Anthony, we want grandchildren. We want, you get married, have a big family, But being very, very, very devout Catholics, they said, okay, Anthony. Well, Anthony, of course, went on, brilliant, valedictorian of his high school graduating class. And then he was offered again a full 4-year scholarship with a stipend. He turned it down because he felt called to be a priest. So he went through formation there in New York. And then he was chosen, of course, because he was so brilliant, graduated summa cum laude with his master's degree in philosophy. He was chosen to go to Rome. It only made sense because he was so brilliant. I mean, head and shoulders above anyone. He goes there, but of course, the man has integrity. He's not only smart intellectually, but he has moral courage. So when he sees what's going on with Adam Park, which is being hidden, and covered for by the rector, Peter Harmon, he becomes a threat to them. They have to get rid of this guy because he's going to blow the whistle on us.
Oh, wow.
And so when he goes back for his operation, they call Dolan, who, remember, has a checkered past in terms of relationships with other people like Lucas, even when they were in the minor and college seminary together.
Yeah.
So they get Dolan to say, well, that you were found to be slow in human formation, so we're going to have to, you can't go back to Rome. And of course, he was getting all A's. He was brilliant. But so he wanted to meet with Dolan. Let's discuss it. What have they accused? This is all false. I didn't do anything wrong. Of course, Dolan won't meet with him, just like Francis doesn't want to admit that, silence. They always give you silence when they're covering something up. So in the end, he's coerced into leaving because they wanted him to go to be in a rectory with this former secretary of Dolan, who was also a homosexual, and he refused. So in the end, because he saw that wasn't going to work out, they were only going to stretch him out longer. And even then, there was no guarantee that he would be allowed to go back into formation. So he left. But then when he discovered, especially when more and more seminarians were coming forward with reports of being preyed upon by Park, it's then armed with all of that new evidence, which was substantiated by other investigators, including a special agent in charge of the FBI. He then filed suit in New York court against Dolan and the North American College and the Archdiocese of New York. Well, the judge said, well, look, this is separation of church and state. I don't want to hear this case. So, of course, Anthony's lawyer appealed immediately, because he said, you can't dismiss this. There's they're appealing the grounds for the dismissal. So right now, the case is still there. But remember, Dolan, has, employed all these lawyers, but getting paid $1,000 an hour. The North American College retained Fox Rothschild, which is a very, very pro LGBTQ law firm that employs over 1,000 lawyers. So you have two major law firms going against Anthony Gorgia and his one, lawyer, Raymond Belair in New York.
Oh wow, David and Goliath.
And so Anthony started a GoFundMe account to raise funds for his defense. But then CNA came along and reported, oh, the case was dismissed, but they didn't say it was under appeal. So they led everybody to believe that Anthony's case was thrown out, which is not. But you see, when CNA reported that, it led everybody in the world to believe that the case was dismissed, it's not under appeal. Fundraising stopped, zero amount coming in. So now we're trying to get the word out. We're trying to, just like CNA lied about the number of seminarians that were enrolled in the NAC, saying there were 200, there's less than 90. Just that they lied and trying to let people think that there's no case here. You see, CNA never said that we have all these other former seminarians who have submitted sworn affidavits, to the court, substantiating, Anthony's claim. So in other words, his case is rock solid. But unless he gets more financial support from his Save Our Seminarians GoFundMe account, he's probably going to lose. Because if you can't, because they're fighting, they're delaying. New York and the North American College, their lawyers are delaying. And of course, his costs are going up and up and up. So unless people, in other words, I'm saying, look, instead of contributing your money at church on Sunday, consider helping good seminarians like Anthony and these others who are canceled and thrown out. If you want a priest to serve you in your parishes in the future and to serve your children and your children's children, support the GoFundMe account, which all you have to do is Google it, and I'm sure on your website you can show them too.
Yeah, we'll put a link. We'll put a link to the GoFundMe as well as to your most recent report on your YouTube channel. We'll put a link to that as well. So support Anthony if you can. But we're just about out of time. Father Gene Gomulka, I wish you had better news. I really wish we could just talk about fun things, good and
I wish so.
things. But unfortunately, someone has to shine the light into the darkness because the cockroaches think they own the kitchen, and someone's got to let them know that they don't. So I'm grateful to you for doing what you do, and I'm sure it's not fun or easy for you to do that.
No, keep me in your prayers and keep all the abuse victims that I'm working with. There's a number out there, and they really need your prayers. We want to prevent them from becoming alcoholics or drug addicts or committing suicide.
Yeah.
We need to expose these predators and get justice for the abused and those who are reprised against, like Anthony Gorgia, for exposing what's really going on.
Before I do let you go, I'm like one last to get your comment on something. I was just reminded that who was the guy from the Vatican who was at a conference in the U.S. and they were asking about Father Rupnik artwork and why the Vatican Communications Office kept using it. And he's like, listen, we're not going to get rid of it. We're not, so it hurts the victims. No, like it's not that big of a deal. Can't you just get over it? Even America Magazine thought that was crazy. That's how bad things are. That when America Magazine is criticizing it, you got big problems. What do you think about Rupnik's artwork still being used, still being sort of defended and justified? And think about how insensitive that is to the victims who've had to incur the disgusting, diabolical abuse of that evil man.
Well, again, you nailed it, Joe. I mean, it's not just the artwork. It's what the artwork represents in terms of the cover-up. Because you see, even though we know what Rupnik did was totally gross and evil, but the problem is the victims are re-victimized when they see church leaders not coming to their defense and doing something to counter all the money that this guy's made off of this artwork. And so by allowing it out there, they are re-victimizing the abuse victims, the
Yeah.
nuns whom he abused, and others who were not abused by him. But any abuse victim out there is going to be affected by this decision to let this artwork, remain where it is.
Yeah. Father Gene Gomulka, God bless you. God love you. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me. God bless you, Joe. Keep up the good work.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.